Kim, welcome to the Sipping Point.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, you have such an amazing background and so many varied experiences, whether, journalism with Dan
Yeah,
Rather or flamenco dancing,
I know.
quite a unique combination I've never had on the show before.
I know.
So, amongst other things, but tell me a little bit about your journey to wine and how did those experiences inform how you approach wine and wine education today at Le Bernardin?
So, I kind of have sort of grown up around wine. I had an uncle who had a very large Bordeaux collection. So, I sort of got to go down into his cellar, and I was probably the only one allowed in the cellar because, he threw my aunt out on several occasions when she tried to clean the cellar, and he insisted that there be cobwebs and dust and, so on. And I had my first sip, and it was a Margaux Chateau Margaux 1959. I wasn't very old. I remember being quite young, and I don't remember anything about the wine except I remember thinking that it felt like sort of like red velvet going down my throat. And that was sort of that's my first sort of real memory, of wine. And I sort of remember really liking it. Of course, fast forward many years, and now we're here. But that was sort of the formative point, if you will. And then I sort of ran away from wine, or just, life took over really. And I ended up, in journalism. I actually started out life working for a rock band called The Cure. Not too much wine involved there, but there was an awful lot of Cristal back then. I mean, this is, you're talking about the early 90s, and, there was an awful lot of, Cristal being popped. I remember Robert Smith he loved a combination of Heineken beer and orange juice, which I thought was, ugh, rather
Ew.
unappealing. But anyway, then, throughout the 90s, I really wasn't into wine. Well, I didn't think I was going to be into wine at all, apart from just drinking it. And then I decided that I was going to write. And as a writer, to sort of sustain my life and pay my bills, I thought, well, I'm going to get one of these jobs working for some rich lady. And so I did. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'll be a PA. I get X amount of money. I get health insurance. It's fantastic. Well, in about a period of 2 years, I probably had about 8 jobs, and I got fired from every single one of them because all of these women were just unbearable. I mean, unbearable. And the final straw was this one woman who actually called me up on Christmas Day, and she said, well, I need you here right away. And I said, well, it's Christmas Day. I mean, I'm about to prepare Christmas dinner. And she said, well, I must wear my yellow Prada for Christmas lunch. So you've got to come here to iron it. And I just said, okay, yeah, that's it. I'm not doing this anymore. Then, I've had it. Then I didn't know what to do. And my uncle suggested, he said, well, why don't you go back to wine school? Take some time out, go back to wine school. And he was a big Bordeaux fan, and he thought I would end up in Bordeaux. Well, I ended up in Burgundy, in Beaune. And I had fallen in love with Burgundy because I had tasted 1992 Nuit Saint-Georges au Murger from Sylvain Catia. And I had just thought that I'd gone to heaven. It was like liquid silk. It was like touching the eternal in a way. There was this sort of remarkable moment at the restaurant when I thought, good God. And I was really touched by that wine somehow or the other. And so I ended up in Beaune, and I was there for 5 years, and I studied a lot and harvested with some fantastic houses, got to know a lot of people. And now it's kind of, Burgundy to me is a little bit like my holy grail. And that's kind
Wow.
of in the middle. I did decide to do some flamenco because I thought it would be, fun and interesting. And I'd always sort of loved to dance. And I ended up in Seville, a similar time frame, and I loved it. And there I actually discovered the wines of Jerez, and those are, not just the finos and the amontillados and, the sherries, but by then, some of those winemakers had kind of gone back to winemaking and vinifying Palomino Fino the way it used to be vinified before sherry happened. And I found them gorgeous. There was this lovely sort of salinity to them. There was this beautiful sort of tang of the ocean because, it's right there. It's right on the Mediterranean. And so I fell in love with those.
Well, speaking of salinity or minerality or whatever you want to call it, volcanic wines are having a moment right now
Oh,
because, they deliver some of that experience.
yes.
And, we can't scientifically say exactly, why the soil does this to the end taste of the wine. But I know right now I'm obsessed with so many of the wines that are from places with volcanic soils. And we're going to talk about a few today from
Yes.
Greece, from Italy. But really, I mean, I've had some winemakers on here from California, from Oregon, where they are making wines also from volcanic soils. So it really exists all around the world, sometimes from many, many more years ago. But tell me a little bit about your thoughts. I brought one to the table that I'm going to introduce you to, but what are your thoughts on the whole idea of volcanic wines? I'm calling it lava to glass
Yeah.
for my wine pack I put together. But what are your thoughts on these wines? And then I know we're going to introduce each other to a couple of our favorites.
Yes, I happen to be a big, big Sicilian wine fan, specifically Mount Etna. I'm a huge fan of Caricante. I think that for me, so it has summer written all over it. I think that sort of crispness that you get, that sort of backbone of minerality that the wine has, off of which the fruit hangs just so perfectly. It's balanced and it's just so refreshing to drink. I mean, you can be like, for example, today it's 90 degrees and there's nothing better than a really lovely, cold, crisp glass of white wine. So, it takes you back. You close your eyes, you could be on a beach or by a pool, even
That's
though
true.
I'm in the middle of Manhattan here, but it really, it takes me back a little bit to the time I spent when I was much younger in the south of Spain. It sort of, it gives me, when I drink Etna crisp white wine from Mount Etna, I feel very carefree. It has that sort of Mediterranean sort of, you leave your troubles behind and, you're off for the summer. It's great.
Yeah. So show me the Caricante you brought
Okay.
to the table. You're white from Sicily. I have had many in the past and I absolutely love them. So I think this is a great addition.
So here's mine today. This is Benanti, one of my favorite producers in Etna. This is their Etna Bianco, which I think is really, really well priced. Quality wise, it's just, you can't beat it. There's several other producers that I really like. There's Salvo Foti that I have discovered and love. This Bascio Pisciaro, who I have also liked quite a lot. But, I always somehow come back to Benanti, even though I sort of go exploring. This is 100%. Yeah, it's 100% Caricante. It's the 2024 vintage. I must say, it's 12% alcohol. So, you can kind of drink a fair amount of this and not, not get completely teetotaling, brain oiled.
Yes.
But this is really lovely.
Since as a senior sommelier at Le Bernardin, you probably do a fair amount of recommending wine and food together. So tell me a little bit about what would you put with this Caricante? What's one of your favorite? It doesn't need to be fancy food. It could be just something you make at home on a Wednesday night.
Now, with this, I would do sort of, for example, at Le Bernardin, we do a scallop and uni dish, which I think this would be lovely with. Very, very simple, just a little bit of, lemony based sauce. Marinière. Love this, for example, with any kind of grilled fish, which you've just done, either just sauteed quickly in a pan or you've done it on your grill outside, a little bit of lemon, a few herbs. Grilled fish, you can do this with fried fish as well. Fried
Mm,
calamari is really nice. You could also do it with like a very simple sort of a fresh burrata and tomato salad with just some basil, because
hmm.
you've got this sort of slight herbaceous quality to this as well. It's subtle, but it's there. So, that can pick up a little bit on the basil. I would also do, yes, any kind of like fresh salad with a sort of lemony herb dressing. I think this would be
Love that.
this would be just ideal. You could also do like a simple chicken. It doesn't have to be fish. You could do a simple grilled chicken. Just if there's no tomatoes in the sauce for the chicken, because sometimes when you get those tomatoes, then you kind of have to move to the red. I always say with pairings, pick that one salient ingredient. And for me, the summertime is always lemon, because it's just, it's citrusy, it's fresh, it's bright, it's got the acid. And I think this is ideal. It just is.
Yum. I'm getting hungry now.
No, I just made myself
Yeah.
happy.
So I brought the Patronakis Vidiano.
Oh,
Vidiano is this is from Crete and it's an
yeah.
indigenous grape to
Yes,
Crete. And what I love about this, of course, very volcanic soils there, and in a lot of different places within Greece, but
yes,
it's got that crisp and citrus note to it with that minerality, but it also has some stone fruit and some more lifted aromatics. So it's not just a citrus bomb.
yeah.
And so you have this really cool, sort of two sides to this wine with that crisp acidity, but also some really amazing aromatics and intense fruit. A lot like what you described with yours as well. But I really enjoy it. And the same thing, when I tasted this wine the first time, it is part of my Lava de Glass pack, which is 3 volcanic wines, guys, for 85 and free shipping. I'll post the link to the wines that Kim has and to the wine pack if you want to check it out. But is that this really is summer in a glass. It
Oh,
has all of those great characteristics. And think of the things we eat in summer. They are things that you might squeeze a lemon on, like
yes.
you said, a salad, seafood.
Yeah. I mean, again, Laurie, don't forget, we're both with these wines, we're both in the Mediterranean and we're sort of, mid to Eastern Mediterranean. And, the terroirs are not that different. It is, you're talking about Sicily to Greece is not that far. And then from Greece over to, for example, Turkey and Lebanon is not that far. So we are talking about a part of the world where the climate is not dissimilar and
Mhm.
cultures you can also sort of compare a little bit because remember if you go back to historic times that whole area Sicily, Greece, Malta, Cyprus, they were all part of this first the ancient Greek world and then they were part of the Roman Empire. So awful lot of trade, an awful
It's a
lot of,
good point.
back and forth going on 2,500 years ago. And so I'm not entirely surprised that these wines share similar characteristics.
Yes. And I love that they're indigenous grapes that people may never have tried before. And I always,
Hmm.
I joke around and I say, if you can't pronounce it, you should be drinking it. Cause I don't want people to not try things just because
Oh,
they're afraid to say it wrong. Or, I always say, hey, if I'm visiting you at Le Bernardin and I see a wine that I want to try, you can point to the wine on the
oh yeah,
list. You don't even have to try to butcher the name and you will help us along. But
exactly.
I know believe that the glass is the speaker for the wine.
Oh,
So tell me a little bit about that.
So I'm quite mad about glassware. And at home, I'm now using these lovely glasses from a company called Glass Vin, which is run by this lovely gent by the name of David Kong. And I love the shape of the glass. I love how it feels. I love how it feels. Now, I do, as a nod to my boss, Aldo Somm, I also have Zottos. And, we do occasionally use those at Le Bernardin. But I've also got, believe it or not, I've got those heavy sort of crystal Baccarat glasses. And if you taste wine, you go from one to the other, it really makes a difference. Glasses to me are so important because I always say, as you mentioned, the speakers for the wine, because they shape the way the wine hits your palate. They shape the way you first get that first sort of aroma. The aromatic profile of the wine hits you from the glass. I mean, it's a little hard to sort of stick your nose in the bottle because you're not really going to get too much. So you need a little bit of surface area. I've got a bit of a fat nose, so if I stick my head in a bottle, I'm just going to get stuck. So I think glasses are important, and I always say to people, if you put a big, heavy Cabernet Sauvignon in like a small glass, you're doing it a complete disservice. It's sort of like, you've got your phone and, you're watching Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible on your phone. How sad is that? I mean, it's so much better if you go to, an IMAX theater and watch, Tom Cruise with all the sound effects and, and the impact of the movie in the IMAX theater is so much greater. And in the same way, the impact of the wine in the right glass is so much better. All the glass does is it enhances your experience of the wine. It really kind of,
Mhm.
it takes it from here to here. It just makes it a completely different wine. So much more enjoyable. That's why I always say that the glass really matters.
It really does. And I actually have had David on the show. He's fabulous. And I love the glasses.
Yes, I do
They
too.
are so feather light. It's
These are his.
crazy how light they are, aren't they?
These are his. They're great.
And you feel like it's all wine and almost no glass. And that really does allow you to just really focus. And I'm sure you're probably like this too, if I end up at a restaurant somehow with those big, chunky, clunky glasses, I won't want to even drink wine. I probably will drink a beer or some sort of cocktail because I'm not going to, it's not going to be the experience. It just, to me, and people say, any glass that has wine is a wine glass. I'm sure you've heard that joke.
No, it's
But
not.
I said, okay, take a solo cup, the plastic red solo cups.
Yes.
Take an orange juice and then take really, really nice wine glass, or maybe a not so great wine glass and a really nice wine glass.
Yeah.
But try it out of all of those different glasses. And if you do it side by side, you absolutely will see how much different.
Of course, you really do. I try and sort of also, in fact, I was saying to somebody, there was a guest last night, and, they said they were having the Deux de Sol, which is an iconic, Le Bernardin dish. And I said, well, honestly, I said, I think, nice white Burgundy with this dish would really be lovely. And I suggested Meursault. And, I said, well, Meursault, kind of like the heart of white Burgundy. It's just beautiful. And they said, oh, we hate Chardonnay. So I said, okay, no problem. That's fine. And so I brought along the bottle and I had them taste it. And they said, this is Chardonnay. And I said, yes, it is. And, then of course I served it in a Burgundy glass. And they said, well, why are you serving it in this big glass? I said, because Chardonnay needs space. It kind of needs that round space to swirl and then to kind of, push out its aromas. And it's interesting because these people's eyes lit up, once they finally got it, once they finally understood, because I did a side by side. I said, here, this isn't sort of an AP glass, an all-purpose glass, and this is a specific sort of Chardonnay glass. Taste it. You tell me. And when you do that side-by-side taste, people get it. A lot of being a sommelier at Le Bernardin is actually educating people, because, some people will come in and, they kind of think, oh, I'm at Le Bernardin, it's 3 Michelin stars, and they get all sort of, they get a little twitchy about things, because remember at Le Bernardin, all the sommeliers wear the testava, and so, you walk up and they have no idea what this big silver thing around your neck is, and you're wearing a black suit with a black tie, and I can only imagine how sort of intimidating that could be to somebody who doesn't know. And there was this one couple, and the guy said, no, we'll get something in a minute. Great. So I went back and I said, something from our cellar, has it caught your eye? Would you care for something by the glass? And I noticed him on his phone, and he was on ChatGPT. And he had asked, the question on ChatGPT is, what should I drink at Le Bernardin? And I thought, blinking heck, I'm standing in front of you. I'm a human and I'm perfectly qualified to tell you, what to drink. Anyway, they ended up having the filet mignon at Le Bernardin, and they wanted Sauvignon Blanc with the filet mignon. And I thought, ChatGPT really got it wrong this time, because they ChatGPT what to eat and what to drink. And I thought, oh God. Anyway, but people do things like
that. It does make mistakes, people. If you're using chat, it does make mistakes. But since AI came up, and I wanted to touch on that anyway during our interview.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on, beyond even AI, on ChatGPT, just AI in general in the wine business? Do you see a place for it? Are you hoping it stays out of the wine business? What are your thoughts?
Here's the thing that I think ChatGPT or any kind of form of artificial intelligence does, and does very well and does very fast, is that it can gather and analyze data extremely quickly. So I can go onto ChatGPT and say, tell me about Chateau Petrus 1989. 2 seconds later, I've got everything I want to know about Petrus 1989. 100-point wine, standing vintage, beautiful. Here are all the tasting notes, blah, blah, blah. But then You see, then you go to open the 1989 Petrus. Now, what ChatGPT can't tell you is how that bottle's going to taste. It can give you the tasting notes of other people who've tasted it, but that specific bottle that I open, it doesn't know. And it doesn't know because
Hmm.
it's artificial. I mean, it doesn't have a palate. So I can taste that wine and I can say, "Mm, it's tertiary. It's just over the edge. It's not drinking as well." Do you know what I mean? So in other words,
Right.
ChatGPT can give me all the data. It can, for example, you go onto a website, you're ordering wine online and you go onto a website and, based on whatever your past purchases have been, ChatGPT can make other recommendations. But what ChatGPT can't replace is that human palate. It can't replace, it can't really taste minerality. It's not going to be able to taste the minerality in this Benanti. It's not going to be able
Hmm.
to taste, those stone fruits in the wine, in your wine. It's just not going to be able to do that. So, ultimately with wine, can it help? Yes, I think it can. It can also help to educate a lot of people because it gathers data so fast. But ultimately, I think you're just going to have to taste in order to really learn. I think you have to train your palate, and I think you have to train yourself to kind of figure out those little nuances and those little notes, and you have to train your nose and your palate. And I think
And
you can't replace that.
since wine is evolving over time, when you taste it today versus a year from now, the wine could be tasting totally different. And so you're right, there
Precisely.
is no way for chat to, predict. I
No.
mean, maybe someday, I don't know how it would do
Maybe.
this, but yeah, there's no way for it to know exactly.
No.
But speaking of tasting, we both brought an Etna Rosso
Yes. Oh,
red. Mine from the Set-a-Porter in Etna,
oh,
and
lovely.
you
Oh,
have,
it's also Benanti. Mine is Benanti's
yes, your
Baroque.
favorite.
And it is, again, even though it's red, it's light enough. I can see the stem of the glass. It's, got that beautiful kind of cherry color, like that summer cherry color. Similarly on the nose. With this particular Etna Bianco, you get that. If you ever go to Sicily, I'm sure you have, but you get that kind
Not yet,
of,
not yet.
well, you have to. You get that sort of, it's that Mediterranean brush. It's kind of like that herbaceous sort of slightly lavender, slightly thyme, slightly rosemary kind of, it's kind of, I just call it Mediterranean brush. They're these low bushes that you see and they grow all over mid to eastern Mediterranean. And I kind of get
And
that
I'm
slightly perfumed.
very, and I get the red fruit, I get the
Yeah.
herb, but the also here with that minerality, it's kind of like a smoky minerality that, obviously this is red. Mine is mostly the Nerello Mascalese
Mine is
grape. And I agree. I think this can be slightly chilled, which I love for
yes.
those warm times.
Oh, yes, yes.
And recently I had an interview and we talked about serving temperature of red wines. Mostly we were talking in terms of restaurants
Yes.
and how so many restaurants leave their red wines just sitting on the
Oh,
counter. Most of our room temperatures are around 70, 72 degrees,
yes.
which is not ideal for serving most red wines. So
Oh, no.
what do you do at Le Bernardin? Because he did a piece on this for Esquire, and this was
Oh,
back
yeah.
in the 90s.
Yeah, yeah.
And he went to the top 10 restaurants in New York City, and all of them failed the temperature test except Le Bernardin. You were the only ones that passed. There were some reds being served at 88 degrees.
Heat. Holy
88
crap. How
degrees.
can you even drink
Yeah.
that at that point? That's awful. Look,
So what do you do to make sure it hits the table at the right temperature?
I love the cellar at Le Bernardin. That's probably where I spend the most time. I love the cellar because, I'm surrounded by these bottles. You kind of get into this sort of meditative state. I like to serve, red wine between sort of, depending on the variety of grape, between sort of 55 and 60 degrees. I don't even like to serve a Cabernet Sauvignon that warm. You just have to have a little freshness on it just to take that edge off. A Pinot Noir or like, an Etna Rosso, you can do even you can get closer to 55 degrees. I think that that's sort of nice for a light red. I think for whites, I think sort of depending, 40 to 45 to 55 degrees, depending again. I mean, if you've got, a big sort of like a Corton Charlemagne, I mean, you're not going to serve it freezing cold because you're not going to be able to taste anything. You won't get anything. You'll just get cold.
Mhm.
It's the old thing of, if you eat a strawberry that's directly out of the fridge, you're not really going to taste the fruit at all. You're just going to taste cold. And that's kind of the same thing, with an overly cold white wine. Now, look, there are some white wines that you should serve chilled. The Carucante shouldn't come out at 55 degrees because that's going to be just awful. But, you can serve that if you like it really cold and it's 90 degrees out, yes, go to 40 degrees. It's fine. But otherwise 40 to 43, a muscadet, those sort of young, fresh
Mm.
wines, should be served cold. But I think white wines between, say, 42 and, 50-ish, somewhere around there, 52, 42, 52. And then, red wines, depending, 55 to about 60, somewhere around there. You kind of judge it, just by sort of, if you touch the bottle, you'll get a sense of it.
I love these Etna Rossos because they just to me have such the great balance of the fruit we talked about, that minerality, the acidity is great. So I know this is going to be food friendly, but there's also a little bit of tannin there on the end
Oh,
too. So
yeah.
the variety of what you could put this with
It's
and the fact that you could even maybe chill it, maybe more than you might think. And so this could be sitting outside and having a burger. This could be sitting outside and having a pasta salad or, whatever people, but you could also put it with grander foods as well. But it is really, to me, such a great value for such a balanced wine.
this Etna Rosso, for example, last summer, I drank a fair amount of. I drank it with, grilled lamb chops outside. Drank it
Mm,
also with like there's that wonderful Sicilian dish, the pasta alla nonna, which is pasta alla norma, sorry, which is eggplant and tomato based. I mean, because the
mm.
tomato does really well with, the flavors in this. And then you've got that little bit of tannin that kind of cuts through the sort of fattiness. Oh, it was delicious. Oh my God, it was really lovely. It was gorgeous. And yes, chilled is always better. Chilled is always
Yes.
better.
And I posted about this on Instagram and I got a lot of comments and a lot of people are passionate about their reds not being served room temperature. So we need to change that rule. It's cellar
Yeah.
temperature, not room temperature.
No. Because the room temperature, I mean, what if you don't have AC? Then your room temperature is what, 80 degrees? That's nuts.
What about the idea of price? Because I know
Oh,
that a lot of people, and it's, certainly if you come into a restaurant like Le Bernardin, you have some, I'm sure, amazingly rare, very expensive bottles.
oh
But
yeah,
on the other side of the coin, you probably have some great affordable values too. So
we do.
do you think you always get better wine when you pay more?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you get, at the end of the day, I think when you come into a place like Le Bernardin, I think it's best at Le Bernardin, your sommelier is your best friend because your sommelier knows the list. Your sommelier works with the list. Your sommelier looks at the list every single day and knows what's there and can describe those wines to you. So if somebody says to me, take for example, yesterday, fellow said to me, he said, I want to drink a really rare, beautiful red Burgundy that I can't find anywhere else. No problem. I said, do you have a budget in mind, sir? And he said, no, but I want to be impressed. Great. 1899, Armand Rousseau, Claude de Bez, Chambertin. Now that's an unforgettable wine because A, it's 99. B, Rousseau in 99 was exceptional. Claude de Bez is one of those storied vineyards, that you don't get to drink every single day. So, you'll get people like that. But then you'll have somebody say, we'd like to do cocktails, after dinner drinks, and a bottle of wine $500, no problem. And we can find you something very nice. In that case, you kind of have to backtrack because you've got to figure, X amount for this, X amount of that. Now, going
Hmm.
back to your initial question, you don't have to spend a fortune, even at a place like Le Bernardin. We have wines you can buy for, between $75 to $50,000. So that's the range of this list. You can get a really lovely bottle of even Burgundy for $200, $175. Because for even in Burgundy, despite the fact that Burgundy's, gone through the roof and prices are stratospheric, you still have certain places, Auxey Durès, for example, where you could still get very good value for money. Auxey Durès, there's also Marron. You also have Fichat, which is kind of the northernmost part. Now, the reds from Fichat are going to be a little bit more corpulent, a little bit more muscly. It won't necessarily be that kind of elegant style of Chambol-Musigny, for example. It'll be richer. It'll be a little, a little bit more, a little broader. But you can still get you can still get lovely Burgundy without having to, run to your banker and ask for a personal loan. You can.
Nice.
That,
Nice.
and I think so, people have this misconception that, oh, if I go to Le Bernardin, I have to spend, an arm and a leg. Not necessarily.
Just a pinky. Just a pinky.
I mean, Chablis, for example, you can get great value in Chablis. Chablis, the northernmost part of Burgundy, and the wines, there you get that stoniness, that minerality, that smokiness, that flintiness that is perfect with fish. It's lovely.
I know you love Burgundy,
I do.
and obviously that comes through in our conversation, but
Yeah.
also obviously the Mediterranean wines. Are there any grape varietals, regions, or types of wines that you think people should really consider now for great value? What would you suggest?
I really do enjoy a good Grüner Veltliner. I mean, this is a, tip of the hat to my wine director, Aldo. I mean, I love champagne. I love champagne. I can drink champagne any day of the week, any time of day. I love champagne. But champagne, champagne can get pricey. Champagne is one of those things where, again, like Burgundy,
Yes.
it's not as accessible.
But if you do love champagne, and I know you know this, a Cremant is a great
Crémant is
sort of an affordable way to go.
Yes. Crémant de Bourgogne, again, here we back and forth, but a
Yes.
Crémant de Bourgogne is really lovely. Crémant de Loire, because it's a lot of Chenin Blanc it can also be really lovely. I think some of the wines from the Loire Valley are, I think, also a good Chenin is always great. Great, you can get some lovely Sancerre Rouge, which is again Pinot Noir, that could also be quite lovely. I must say my guilty pleasure is I call it the Brad Pitt wine. It's the rosé from Miraval.
Yes.
And I call it the
And
Brad Pitt wine.
actually,
And I think it's
they make a starter wine just below the price of Miraval, which is called Studio by Miraval. And it prices out around $18, at least in my market.
yeah,
And it's quite good. Well, I love that, Kim. This has
yeah.
been so much fun. We're just so thankful you visited us here on the Sipping Point. And I just wanted to say thank you and cheers.
Thank you very much and cheers.